Rob, we're diving into Revenge of the Cybermen.
We are. We put it up for a vote. It clearly won. Here we are.
It did. A couple of others gave it a run for its money. It wasn't locked in until the last day or two, but it did have a strong finish, and it did win comfortably. This is a story that, well, look, I think a lot of people would say it's a very familiar story. Rob, what is it to you? How did you come to Revenge of the Cybermen? Before we ask what you think of it, how did you come to it?
Oh, Dave, my story will be the same as many of the older listeners out there, because I saw this as a BBC video release, pure and simple. You know, although it would have been on TV semi-regularly in Australia, this was the period before I became a real fan. So this is like 85-ish. I wasn't obsessively watching the TV every night to see every bit of Doctor Who I could. So it was my brother who got the video. Now, whether he had bought it or whether it was from the video store, I don't know. I know he owned it later on, and so did I, for that matter. I had my own collection of Doctor Who. He had his own collection of Doctor Who. We doubled up on tapes. It was bizarre. In the same household, there were two sets of the same videos. But for this first time, it could have just been a rental. I seem to recall my parents were on holiday. We had the lounge room to ourselves, probably got in a big Chinese meal and sat in the dark and watched it. And I thought it was a lot of fun as a 10-year-old.
Yeah, look, my story's very similar. I was watching Doctor Who every night as it went out in the 80s as a kid, so I'm sure I saw it a couple of times at least on the ABC at 6:30 on a weeknight. The copy that we had at home, though, was definitely dubbed from the copy at the video store, that first video release, because right. I do remember it not having cliffhangers in it.
Oh.
And you know, even now the cliffhangers are always sort of a surprise. Like, oh, that's right, there's a cliffhanger there. So look, it is a very familiar story. It was the first VHS to come out. It was out on DVD as sort of the middle of the set. I think it was in the first Blu-ray set to come out. And it is that obvious go-to story. If you want to do a Doctor Who story, well, okay, you want to do Tom because he's the most popular classic Doctor. You can't get the rights to the Daleks because Terry Nation's a state of bastards. So, well, you go and get the Cybermen story. And there's one Tom Cybermen story. It's Revenge. It's a really obvious go-to for a lot of people. And I think for that reason, it is very, very familiar. Very, very accessible.
Yes.
I'll be surprised if there are many, if any, people out there in Listenerland who haven't seen this, potentially quite a lot.
Yeah, well, certainly a lot of people voted for it, so I think they've seen it and they want to hear what we have to say.
Well, shall I go first or shall you?
Well, before we go first, I pulled out some interesting facts about the story, which don't really fit into talking about our feelings. They're just facts.
Oh, well, I like facts.
What if I throw them out there first?
Go on.
Dave, as you would know, this is the first story where gold is deadly to a Cyberman.
Yes.
And when you think about it, that's pretty extraordinary given how many stories we'd already seen them in. But at the same time, they'd been gone for so long off the screens, you have to assume that maybe the writers were like, well, no 8-year-old today is going to remember them even being on TV the last time, let alone the finer details. You know, because this is pre-reference books, pre-internet, pre-everything. You know, you just didn't know that stuff, so this gold thing being introduced, yeah, fine. The second interesting fact is this is also the first story where the guys playing the Cybermen get to say their own dialogue. Isn't that extraordinary?
Yes, that is interesting, yes.
And also, it's the last time Kevin Stoney is in the series. He'd been Tobias Vaughan, of course, and Magic Maverick Chen in the past. Conversely, it's the first time David Collins is in the series, and he'd go on to be in Robots of Death and Mordred Undead after this. So there's a little nice crossover there between Kevin Stoney and David Collins. So they're my 3 interesting facts about the story.
Well, they are interesting, but why don't you keep going and tell us what you think of it?
Well, Dave, I think the story has a reputation of being disliked out there. I mean, the discontinuity guide you mentioned earlier in this episode on a separate topic, the discontinuity guide absolutely eviscerates this story. And I have no doubt if we scratch the surface out there, we will find fans who are much the same. But my experience with fandom around the time of making this podcast, you know, because we're talking to people on Twitter about it and so on, and even in some years prior, is that for whatever reason, whether it's that BBC video, whether people just like the Cybermen, whether it's just an early Tom performance that people remember warmly because his early performances are just amazing, there seems to be way more love for this story than received fan wisdom suggests there is.
I think that's correct, yes.
Yeah, should I go on?
Please, yes. Well,
okay.
You've said what everyone else thinks of it, Rob. What do you think of it?
Okay. Well, look, the Cybermen in this feel pretty deadly to my mind, and that's always a good thing in a Cyberman story. 2 of them go down to Voga and take out a ton of people. It's like the Dalek in the modern series story Dalek when it goes on the rampage. You know, these guys just march along, taking out all and sundry on Voga. Of course, it's questionable why no one has a glitter gun or isn't just throwing gold at them, given they're surrounded by gold. But on the face of it, I find the Cybermen in this story have a goal. They want to blow the shit out of Voga because it's threatening to them. Or what's left of Voga, I should say. And they're pretty deadly and ruthless in trying to reach that goal. So whereas a lot of Cybermen stories out there don't quite work, I find this works for me just fine because these Cybermen have a goal, they're quite deadly. Yeah, I'm fine with it. I don't quite get the way either the Discontinuity Guide or fandom in general really savage this. I think it's quite a good Cyberman story. Am I weird, Dave?
No, I don't think you're weird at all. I think that that's a very natural way to feel about the story. And going into this recording, or going into my watch for this recording, I felt very much the same. I thought, you know what, this is an underrated story. It's a good, fun story. I enjoy it. It's a comfy pair of slippers, as you might say, Rob. Mm-hmm. It's entertaining. It's got a good villain. What's not to like? I mean, okay, it's not as heavy and dense as the Ark in Space and Genesis of the Daleks, but not everything needs to be, and this doesn't need to be. And watching it back, I didn't change that view. This is a very easy, enjoyable story to watch. I like this story. But I did find myself having very mixed views on a lot of aspects on it. There was a lot of, this is really good, but not this bit, or this aspect of it's really good, but not this one. And as I watched it properly, and again we come back to that thing we've discussed many times now on the podcast of the difference between putting Doctor Who on while you're eating dinner or doing the ironing and just sort of letting a familiar story wash over you, and watching for a podcast where you sit there, phone off and away, laptop away, no distractions, and you watch it properly for the first time in a long time. And doing that, I did see its flaws. Its flaws are very, very real. And that probably brings me to the sort of the first big conversation point I have about it, which is the yes, but and the mixed aspect of it. And that is how much of this doesn't quite feel like the production team that we're used to. Now, the writer of this is a little bit ambiguous. Yes, it's Jerry Davis on the credits, but I think we know that the script he started with and the script that it finished off being are fundamentally different. He wrote a story about very old school Cybermen and a space casino and all that sort of thing, and we ended up with what we got on screen, which is a very long way from that.
Which, can I jump in and say, I've read that too, and I thought, that sounds an amazing thing. This casino is a front for the Cybermen. You know, I've seen Hinchcliffe say, oh, you wrote this sort of old school Doctor Who story. I'm thinking, no, that sounds really cool. Wasn't there a Battlestar Galactica episode in the original series where people were going to a casino planet or something and the Cylons were behind it? Anyway, I digress. I thought it just sounded really good, Dave, that original story.
Look, it absolutely does, but given that this was being done with the aim of trying to balance the budget a bit for season 12 and reuse sets from the Ark, I think it could never have been made the way that they intended. Now, when you get something like Genesis of the Daleks, which is a really good story, everybody loves the script, and they go, oh, but I don't like Terry Nation as much as I like Robert Holmes, therefore I'm just going to say Robert Holmes wrote all the good bits of this, despite the fact that it's a template by the numbers Terry Nation script. Yeah. And it probably is a Terry Nation story that Robert Holmes didn't do a lot of writing on. Look, sure, he polished it, but, you know, I think that people oversell Robert Holmes because they like him and don't like or don't admire Terry Nation. Fools. On this one, it's almost certainly a very, very heavy Robert Holmes rewrite, possibly almost a page one rewrite in some aspects. Certainly the changes to the Cybermen, and I think the stuff that works least about the Cybermen are absolutely Robert Holmes rewrites. And nobody ever talks about that because we all love Robert Holmes. I'm not here to stab Robert Holmes, but you've got to say this is not Robert Holmes's best piece of rewriting.
Oh, no. No, I don't think so.
And nor is it Philip Hinchcliffe's best piece of production. Now, you look at Ark in Space, you look at Genesis, you look at Terror of the Zygons, which was made all in the same block. This is not as good as those are on the set. The sets are clearly reused. I like them, they work well, but there's a lot of cheap stuff going on here. There's a lot of really cheap effects going on here that are, frankly, below the standard of the Hinchcliffe years. And the direction, on location, Michael Lee Bryant, who I think is a fantastic director, he was a young, up-and-thrusting director determined to make his mark. His location filming is superb. It's fantastic. He's not getting the best out of his actors or getting the tones right, I think, in a number of scenes on set. So I think this is a very on the one hand but on the other hand type of story. And I think Holmes, Bryant and Hinchcliffe are all below their own very, very high standards.
All right, I've got comments then on Wookiee Hole and on the set itself. I think Wookiee Hole does look great. I mean, location filming always looks good, especially when they're using film. But to me, this location is next level, you know, being underground. What's maddening, though, are some scenes are done against CSO. And you think, oh my God, that's just a quick scene with two guys in it. You couldn't have fired that off on location, just found like a little alcove and just filmed that while you were there. Oh, no. You know, so that's disappointing with the location. And look, while we're talking about location, Dave, the Michael E. Bryant story of being locked in at night to do his initial recce for how he'd like to set up his shots. And he sees a scuba diver go past and go for a bit of a dive. And then later the Wookiee Hole manager tells him that no one else was in there. He was locked in on his own. And that a young man had drowned scuba diving recently. That's got to be BS, doesn't it? I mean,
of course it does.
The manager was surely pulling his leg. He'd let someone else in to go off for a cheeky scuba dive at night and was just making this up for Michael E. Bryant. Sure.
Surely, yes. I've always assumed so, yes. But it's a good story.
It is a good story.
And sorry, let me just say in response to what you said before you go on. I totally agree. I think the Wookiee Hole stuff is really, really good. And you get this sense with the location filming because, as you said, they did basically lock the crew in for the night. They said, right, we're going to, the last tourist is out, we're locking the door, it's yours to play with till the next tourist arrives first thing in the morning. And that seems to have given the cast and the crew a real freedom to take some time and to breathe and to let this flow a lot more naturally. And Brian does proper three-dimensional direction. He uses all three levels of the location, which is something he does in Blake 7 as well, and Dave Maloney's also very good at it as well in that sort of area. He says, right, I'm not just I haven't just got right, left, and front, back. I've got up and down, and he uses it well. And yeah, I think they make remarkable use of it.
Oh, I'm thinking of a scene where Vogons are firing at Cybermen. Vogons are up quite high, and you're sort of looking over their shoulder down at Cybermen.
Yes.
And then, but you can see beyond the Cybermen too, quite a ways as well. And it's like, oh, that's a huge shot.
That's right. He's not just shooting up. He's putting the cameras up and shooting down, which is very unusual.
Absolutely. Now, look, I'd mentioned the reuse of the Ark in Space set as well. I actually love that this story reuses the Ark in Space set. It even gives some reasoning in the story for why it's still around, which is great. It's not trying to be a completely different place and pull the wool. It's saying, yes, this is the same place. You know, and something comparable would be the space station in the long game, in Series 1, showing up again in Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways. Far from feeling cheap, which I think is the inclination people reach for when they hear about this sort of recycling, I feel it gives a sort of a continuity to the universe that I really like. They've been at this location at one time, and now they're in this location at another time. I actually really like it, even though it's a cost-saving method, Dave.
I agree with you, and certainly as a kid particularly, I love the idea that this was one big flowing story and they were coming back. And the sets are really good. Those corridors look like really cool space corridors. It is very effective. However, there are parts of that set that are very, very cheap. Watching them now, I think it's the stuff that's been redressed, where they've had to put in an extra console here, an extra prop here, just to make it look a little bit different, or because the story needs something a little bit different. And I do think that is a little bit more obvious. I think that if this was sort of in some other seasons, if this was in season 15, I wouldn't blink.
Mm-hmm.
But it is because Hinchcliffe has set such a high standard for his era, and we have had stuff like Terror of the Zygotes, we have had stuff like Ark in Space in this production block. It does look a little bit like the cheapie.
It does. But again, I'll throw up, Roger Murray Leach is the designer here, the set designer, and he's built the set up off the studio floor so that we're not looking at the studio floor when we're filming down. He's actually built it up so it does look like a real sort of place. And when doors open, you can see the rooms beyond. They're not CSO or something you can't quite make out. It feels like a really great set in spite of what you're saying.
No, look, it does, and I'm not trying to give it too big a whack. I'm just saying it's below, I think, the standards of a lot of the other stories in that era.
Sure.
But I think the other problem is as well, watching it closely on Blu-ray on a very large television, you do also perhaps notice stuff that I haven't noticed before. As a kid, I remember the floors being these really good-looking grills with little holes in them. Now I can watch them on Blu-ray, and it's clearly a piece of white floor with grey circles sort of painted slightly roughly on it.
Yes.
You can see some of those sort of faults again. I think that is perhaps a problem with the way we're watching it now.
Yeah, it's like a non-slip surface or something, not what you originally thought it was.
Yes, and look, if I can continue the theme of production and loop back as well to something that you opened with, which is the Cybermen.
Yes.
I think that the Cybermen here look really, really good. I love the look of the Cybermen. I love the built-in head guns. I think they're really effective with the little spark shots. And again, as a kid, that was a really, really cool thing. Those shots of them just striding through Voga, wasting every Vogon that comes near them, completely unstoppable, are really good shots. I think you're right. These are really effective, driven Cybermen that look great and are acted very, very badly. I think that there is no doubt that Robert Holmes spiced up their dialogue to be a bit more dramatic and not to be as monotone and dull. And I clearly can imagine Robert Holmes getting Jerry Davis' script and going, this dialogue's boring, I'm going to juice it up a bit. And Jerry Davis going, no, they're emotional Cybermen. He's going, well, it's emotional TV, I don't care. And wanting to give them some actual conversational dialogue. I understand his instinct, obviously, as a fan. That doesn't quite work. But I don't mind that so much. It's kind of the, casual striding that you get around the place. The one that just made me laugh out loud is where the Doctor's got the cyber bomb and he's threatening the cyber leader and trying to get him to talk. And the cyber leader does the big, gosh, to hide the fact that he's sending the signal to his subordinate. Now, that made me chuckle. But then the subordinate getting it and sort of almost doing the body language of, oh, okay, down the corridor. That was just embarrassing. And I think that for a director who is really, really good in many ways, I think that Michael E. Bryant didn't quite work out how he wanted his extras, his cyber extras, to perform. And sometimes they are just a little bit sort of they're not as bad as the quick mate get out Cybermen from Attack of the Cybermen, but there were a few times I did giggle at the Cybermen here, not because of the costume though. I think the costume's cool.
Yeah, well look, again, this is the thing too when it comes to Michael E. Bryant's direction. He hasn't got a lot to work with. The Cybermen had been gone for so long. Like, when was their last appearance? Was it 68 maybe?
69 Invasion
would have been, of course, 69. Still, it's a long time. It's back in the black and white era. They've gone a whole Doctor between then. Pertwee doesn't encounter them. There's a flashback in one of his stories. We don't include that. So it's not even like he's got a lot to work with. Would he have even gone back and watched old tapes at the time? Probably not.
No, there certainly wasn't the corporate memory around the Cybermen that we kind of assume there would have been. Obviously, there wouldn't have been. So I think that he does miss a couple of tricks there. As I say, on location, he films them really, really well. I think the costumes look good. I think, though, that the mannerisms of them are not nearly as good as they could be, and in some cases are actually quite risible.
Yeah. There's a few other aspects. I mean, I've been quite positive about the story, but, I'll be fair. There's a few other aspects that really overreach when it comes to what Doctor Who can do visually in this era. Things like, let's have rockets firing off Voga, and they reuse that US rocket launch that famously used to be in the MTV credits that everyone has seen a million times.
The Saturn V launch, yeah.
Yeah. And when the station is falling towards the planet, the effect is okay at first, but then you just sort of realise, oh, it's just some sort of log rolling over and over and over.
A barrel being rolled and rolled.
Barrel, yes.
Look, again, as a kid, I did not notice that, and I thought it was really impressive.
And again, that's who it's made for. And back in the mid-70s, we saw it a lot differently, literally and figuratively, because the TVs were smaller. Not everyone would have even been on colour back then, and it was kids watching the show. I get all of that. It sometimes feels a bit unfair when we watch it on a modern TV on Blu-ray.
Yeah, look, it absolutely does. And to again be fair and balanced, I forgive it as well, because I think the conclusion, the climax of the story is really, really effective. You've got the sort of the double peril of the beacon coming towards Voga, you've got the rocket going who knows where, you've got the Cybermen doing what the Cybermen are doing, and then you've got a bit of action, a bit of sci-fi all happening. The Doctor and Sarah's dialogue is really good and really clever, and that sort of bouncing around. The Doctor's like, no, I've sorted it all. Oh, no, maybe I haven't. Oops, okay. You know, it's so effective, and then you get a big explosion and the rocket going, and I think it's a great climax. It really, really is a good adventure story. So I forgive the special effects there quite a bit. But you're right. When you look at it critically, as we do now, as a mature pair of men who are watching it on Blu-ray.
Debatable.
Mature in years at least.
Yes.
We're not 8-year-olds watching it in 1976.
No. You mentioned dialogue or bits of dialogue there a moment ago, and I just want to say this story has got Harry Sullivan as an imbecile. It's got, careful I might explode when he gets prodded when he's got the bomb strapped to him. If you were watching this series going out live in the mid-70s and not in love with Tom by this story, I don't think you'd have a pulse. There's just so much good stuff in it.
Yes, that stuff in their very first scene where he says, of course, Carrie, you can have the tie ring. You knew it would do that, didn't you? Yes.
Yeah.
That's just really, really funny. The way he often goes in a different way that you would expect. The way he says, I think he's lying, is not the way you'd normally perform that line, and it works really, really well. I think Tom's in great form here. Really, really good form.
Even just small stuff, like he goes into the transmat, starts playing with the yo-yo, and when he arrives on Voga, he's still playing with the yo-yo. I just love little stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely, but he can still do the action beats really, really well. The scene at the start of episode 2 where Sarah has got the plague, in inverted commas, and he needs to transmat her down, and he can't, and he's got a jury-rigger thing. He puts real depth and urgency and concern into that performance. So he's not doing it to the detriment of the gravitas of the script. He's just throwing in light moments when they need to be light, or when they can be light, as you say.
And mentioning Sarah being infected like that, I want to bring up Warner. Can I tell you, I'm always surprised when Warner dies in this story. I'm always lulled into the idea that the Doctor's got a solution and he's back and he's about to save Warner. And then when Warner dies, I am surprised every time I see this. Yeah,
that's a really effective moment. And it also, for a story that does feel like one of the lighter ones in a quite grim season in some ways, it has grim moments itself. The moment where the Michael Wisher voice over the radio is coming into the beacon and they say, no, we're in quarantine. He says, okay, understood. And then there's that pause and just, mate, how's my brother? And Warner's like, I'll check. That's a really quite a grim little moment. It's not overplayed. It's not as dark as some Hinchcliffe would become, but I think it does sell, though, that this is a very unpleasant place to be.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It almost reminds me of the scene in Mad Max where Max's wife and kid have been run over and the kid is dead. And the wife is in hospital, obviously in a bad way. I think she's lost limbs. She's been run over by a whole motorcycle gang. And Max is listening at the door, and the Doctor is saying, tell him she'll be all right. Tell him, this, that, and the other. And it's similar in this story. Like, basically tell him, everything's fine, sort of thing. Even though clearly the guy is dead.
Yeah.
Can
I tell you about one of my favourite aspects of this story?
Please.
Jeremy Wilkins as Kelman.
The guy is such a bastard.
He is such a bastard, and he's having such fun being a bastard. Look, he's also plays a bastard in the very first episode of Blake 7 and does it very effectively there as well. He clearly gets cast as that kind of character quite a bit. The way that he's just teasing and winding up the Commander is really, really well done. And I love the Commander's reaction to it, you know. Some of my best friends are dead, but he's still alive. Yeah. I love all of that dialogue. I like the way that Kelman plays with the Doctor. I love the way that he's just so annoyed that he's being interrogated by Tyrone. You know, Voris and I were working together. We were going to lure the Cybermen into a trap. You know, just very, very frustrated. It's a wonderful, fun performance to watch. But in the spirit of my on the one hand, but the other...
Right.
As much as I enjoy that performance, he's playing it as such a everybody look, this is the bad guy, this is a bastard, that when it turns out he and Voris, who also is playing the whole thing as a bastard, are actually the good guys, and twist, they're after the Cybermen too, it doesn't quite work.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
It really, really doesn't. And look, I don't think that Kelman is the most altruistic of people. I don't think he necessarily came after the Cybermen out of the good of his soul. He just, wanted the gold that Voris was buying him with. But I think it's meant to be a really profound, like, hey, we misjudged these guys and they're actually after the Cybermen, and if we just got out of their way, the Cybermen would have been defeated. Yes, it would have cost the lives of the entire Nova Beacon crew. Yes. So, he's not exactly innocent, and I don't think he's well motivated, but I don't think that lands as well as it could because they are just having such fun playing villains.
Yeah, I mean, this has just come to me. I mean, a decade later, we get the Doctor saying, how much he's misjudged Lytton, ironically, in another Cyberman story.
Yes.
That lands probably a bit better than this. Still not perfectly, but it lands a lot better a decade later when they do something similar. Yes,
because I think Maurice Coburn knows how the story is going to end and allows a little bit of subtlety into his acting. And look, I'm glad Jeremy Wilkins didn't, because I love Kelman. He's such a fun character. But I don't think that lands in quite the same way as I think Tyrone is meant to be a much more ambiguous character. Like Tyrone is actually in some way shown to be in the wrong, and his position is actually one that he's holding Voga back, and he's not in many ways a defensible position, and he is proven to be wrong by the end of the story. But that doesn't land either, because he's just playing such a sweet old lovely guy who's just so nice, and so you don't sort of get that ambiguity. Not to mention the fact that his mask just doesn't quite fit and the beard's not quite good. So you do get the Iron Tyrant. She's Counselor Vega. So look, lovely performances, but I think some of the subtlety that I'm sure is in the script doesn't quite come across.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's Jeremy Wilkham or maybe it's Michael E. Bryant directing him, just having this idea that because there is the twist, let's really amp it up, that he's just so horrible, because then the twist will pay off even more. But no, it doesn't work like that in reality.
No, look, I think that's absolutely right.
Question without notice. How does this chunk of Voga, which is perhaps more like an asteroid these days floating through space, have air and gravity, Dave?
A wizard did it.
Good answer. Very strange.
Yeah.
Also very strange. The seal of Voga is the seal of the High Council. We need to mention that.
Well, to be fair, the seal of the High Council is the seal of Voga. They got there first.
True. I wonder if Big Finish has done something with it.
Yeah, look, I do. Well, they probably have. I think the fan theory is that the Time Lords probably visited Voga at some point. Who knows?
Yeah.
A really cool moment done really terribly.
Yes.
The cliffhanger to part 1.
Oh, okay.
Look, I think that is a wonderful, terrifying moment. Sarah being bitten by the Cybermat is really scary, really creepy.
Yes.
It's just really obvious that she's standing there holding the thing to her neck.
Well, there's a lot of that acting in Doctor Who in general, isn't there?
There is.
Not just this story.
There is, absolutely. But I think that is a bit unfortunate. It's just very, very obvious. And I think that last scene, it's kind of really obvious there's somebody standing just off camera shaking the thing at her, which is a shame, because otherwise it would be, it would be up there, as one of our correspondents on Twitter said. I think it would be up there with part 1 of Terror of the Zygons, the very next story, where the Zygon comes in and attacks Sarah. I think it's a really good cliffhanger, but again, some of the shortcomings in the production let it down, which is not a sentence we use a lot about Hinchcliffe.
No, but I will mention when the people get infected by the Cybermats, that effect on their face always used to fascinate me as a kid, because even as a kid I could see Doctor Who was low budget, and the effects were quite hammy. I was a kid who grew up on Star Wars, for example. Yeah. So I could tell what was a great effect and what wasn't. But that effect, I could never work out as a kid how they did it. And it was actually reflective tape.
Yeah, front axial projection. Really, really cheap and easy.
Yeah, amazing.
But looks so effective.
Yeah, it looks like, wow, what is that? It stands out as a really good effect.
Yeah, so look, whilst I have absolutely picked on a few of the effects in this, some of them land really, really well. And look, Hinchcliffe presumably was finding his feet as a producer, and, we can't judge Philip Hinchcliffe by his, last season, or even his second last season. He's allowed to get off the ground, and Revenge was shot much earlier in the run than it looks, because it was done back to back with Ark in Space.
Yeah, had to be, yes.
Yeah, so it was one of his earlier things, and he was learning. And look, Michael E. Bryant was also a director who was really keen to innovate and try new stuff, which means that when it works really, really well. When it doesn't, it sometimes falls down, but that's the price of taking a risk. And I would much rather a director who takes a risk and is trying to have a bit of flair that comes off 70% of the time and fails 30% than a director who's just shooting the script flat, he shed, back forth. I'm really, really glad he did it. And it does pay off, even if occasionally it does fall down. Something that doesn't fall down at any moment, though, is Tom. We just need to say again, how good is Tom in this season?
Oh, early Tom Baker. Amazing.
It is amazing. And we have spoken often about how a lot of doctors need time to really find the role. Many of them really need that first season to really be strong in the role. My God, Tom just walks into it, doesn't he?
He does.
Probably like no other. Maybe Hartnell's the only other one. And even he, although his performance is good, his character takes a season to really take shape. But Tom is just there from day one, and he is magnetic to watch in this.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, Dave, I want to talk music too. Carey Blyton does the music here, and they really didn't like it, the production team. They had to go back and sort of redub in new bits of music to sort of flesh it out, apparently.
Yeah, I was really interested to read that, and Philip Hinchcliffe definitely has said that he thought that Brian should have hired Dudley Simpson, because Dudley Simpson just knew exactly what to do and was really, really good. I think it's really good that they didn't. As much as I love Dudley Simpson, he has some wonderful scores. I am a big fan of the idea that you occasionally mix up the music and you occasionally mix up the styles, whether it's classic Who or new Who. I am in favour of occasionally someone different comes in and does something different.
Rather than years of Murray Gold,
Rather
for
than
example.
years of Murray Gold, and the same for Dudley Simpson. I think that as great as Dudley Simpson is, when he's given a break, he often comes back with something really, really good. And also you get to hear a different thing. Jeffrey Bergen coming in and doing Terror of the Zygons next story is one of the best examples of that. But I think the music here is actually really, really good. It evokes the Cybermen really, really well. It complements a lot of that great location work really, really well. I think that although the Cybermat prop is terrible, the music that accompanies it is actually quite creepy and does go a long way to try and sell that dodgy prop.
Yeah, well, this is where I was going with this thought, because I watched the show and knowing this, I was listening to the music specifically, and I was thinking, this can't all be redone stuff. This can't all just be inserts. Surely some of this is his stuff.
Surely.
And it's not bad.
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where 40-something years ago, Philip Hinchcliffe thought this isn't as good as it could have been. Gee, I really wish Michael had hired Dudley Simpson. And as the memory goes on, as he tells that story every couple of years for 40 years, reality starts to get, not detached, but simplified. And I think he's probably exaggerating a bit, and his memory's probably cheating him a bit.
For sure, because even I've seen a Barry Letts interview recently with regard to this, and he's like, we brought the Daleks back, and they were so popular, we thought, what will we do next? We'll bring the Cybermen back. And I'm thinking, there's no way that happened. There's no way the Dalek story, Genesis, went out, and you thought, the reaction to that was good, let's now make Revenge of the Cybermen. You would have made it long ago and made that decision long ago. Yet, in the way he tells the story, it's like, oh, it was a reaction to Genesis being so popular. It's like,
yeah,
no.
Yeah. Look, a lot of those guys have got really great stories from the time, but occasionally, yes, I think timelines get mixed up in their head, and I think that the emphasis in memories gets exaggerated or diminished. And I think in this case, I think Philip's memory of how bad he thought the score was probably has exaggerated itself over time in his head.
Yeah, and I've cited a letter from Carey Blyton to Hinchcliffe, I think, talking about the experience, and it mentions things like they're apparently changing things up on him, wanting different instruments. So he was sort of reacting and maybe not doing his best work because of limitations they were putting on him, both in terms of time and how they wanted things. So it's maybe not all on him regardless. You know, I think they were mucking him around a bit.
Well, however the creative process worked, I think the result was excellent.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
And look, maybe it is one of those cases where the creative tension wasn't fun for all the people involved, but out of that did come actually a very good creative process and a very good creative result.
Yeah, I think so.
The cast here is very, very strong. If you looked at that cast list, you'll just go, this is one of the most deep lists in Doctor Who. I mean, as you said, you've got Kevin Stoney, you've got Michael Wisher, you've got David Collins. The guys playing the Commander and Lester are both people who've been in Doctor Who before and are very good actors. Jeremy Wilkins is really, really good. They're not given, I don't think, as much to chew on here as perhaps was worthy of them. But who cares? It's a great cast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Ronald Lee Hunt is Commander Stevenson. William Marlowe is Lester.
That's right, yes.
They're quite a good team. I mean, Commander Stevenson, he's got nice, sensible slacks and shoes. I always notice that. I always wonder why he's not wearing boots. He seems to be wearing, like, slip-on casual shoes.
Which is a very Michael E. Bryant thing, actually. He was sort of very big on I'm not going to try and predict the future. I'll just put them in something that's very close to modern day. And even the use of the machine guns, for example, he's like, I'm not going to use a bizarre space laser because that's just going to look dodgy in 5 years' time. Give him a machine gun. That doesn't date.
That's right. They've got Uzis.
Yeah.
But this might also explain why they're also using a tape deck to record conversations, and they can just pull tape out to sort of, to destroy the messages. Sometimes stuff like that, I'm like, oh, guys, could you not have thought of a better way?
Yeah, look, that is something that has dated. But again, I forgive it because the way the Doctor just ingratiates himself into the story and into the crew by quickly spotting all these things that are going wrong and going, hang on, there are scratches there and the tape's been removed, and the Commander's like, gee, this guy knows what he's talking about, okay. It's a really good and well-played scene, and Tom plays it really well, so as embarrassing as it is to see reel-to-reel tape, oh, yeah, okay, well, look, it's Doctor Who.
Yeah, fair enough.
Speaking of, did you watch this with the new effects or the originals?
Original. Not through any sort of sense of, I must watch the original. I just didn't even think to turn it over to the new effects, actually.
Yeah, now, I don't think I have watched the effects before. I think when I first watched this, if I did watch it when I bought the Season 12 Blu-ray, I may not have got to it at the time. I didn't watch the effects because they were certainly new to me. And I was quite surprised by the depth and the detail of them.
What happens?
So as well as all the model shots are being done again, which is really, really effective, and the rocket does look much, much better than it does as a model. Lots of the scanner screen effects and the like have now been redone. So all of those visuals do look a lot better, and that's actually quite effective.
Oh, wow. After we record this, I'm going to go and actually watch it again.
No, do. I think it's one of the most effective examples of new effects being put in, I've got to say.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, sometimes stuff like that is good. Like, I think of when they redid Empire Strikes Back, and in Cloud City, they just gave Cloud City some windows.
Yeah.
It took it away from looking like a set and made it feel more like what it was meant to be. So sometimes that subtle stuff, background stuff almost, is very effective. Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's really, really good here. Speaking of effects and props, as a kid, that James Bond, which I now know is from James Bond, the hairbrush and the little thing and all the little gadgets that Kelman has, I was so blown away by that. I think what sci-fi nerd kid doesn't love cool gadgets, and the way that he pulled all that apart and assembled it all, I just thought was really, really effective. And it wasn't until recently I did learn that actually they were James Bond props that
had just been given to them when he came to visit the set.
That's a great story. Because, yeah, when I watched it, I think, oh, that's very Bond-like. Well, clearly it's Bond-like if it was the real thing.
Yeah, yeah. So, Rob, look, in summary, I did find when I watched this, yes, there were some things that weren't as good as the memory perhaps said they were. There are production things, there are design things, there are acting things that I think actually are weaker than the standard that this era has set for itself. And is it unfair to judge an era by a high standard because it is better? Maybe it is, but it has set a high benchmark. It is recognised as one of the, if not the greatest, produced eras of Doctor Who. And occasionally the story, I have to say, does fall down in that aspect. I think I would be being deceptive if I didn't admit that. Do I care, though? Very clearly, I absolutely don't. I enjoyed watching this story. Most of the performances, the location filming, the ideas, the simplicity of it is all very, very welcome, and it's a very, very easy watch. It's not a expensive wine that you sit down and you sip and you nourish all the detail and you indulge yourself in all the depth. It's a good table wine that you take a swig and you go, yeah, this is going to go down really easily. I'm going to finish the bottle.
Exactly. I think you've summed it up very well there, because like I've said all through this conversation, there are elements that give me pause. There are, as I've said, questions without notice. How does Voga have air and gravity? You know, all of that sort of stuff. But put all that aside, it's a good, fun story. The Cybermen have a target. They want to blow it up. And it's that good, simple story that I think just carries it through. I am quite fine with this. And I do get a bit upset when I see things like the Discontinuity Guide just absolutely eviscerate it like it's the worst thing ever, you know, committed to film. It's not.
No, I think that the whole is absolutely greater than the sum of its parts, even if a few of those parts are a little bit weak.
Yeah, agree.
Well, that was our take on Revenge of the Cybermen. As always, do tweet us, write to us, email us, and let us know what you thought. Did you agree? Did you not agree? Are you sitting there bewildered? We didn't love it even more. Are you sitting there outraged and baffled? We didn't think it was terrible. Let us know.
Are we just in the sensible centre, as always?
Well, we're at least in the honest centre, and that's all you can ask.